So here we are, the first day of the 2026 legislative session. Good to see you.
Yeah.
As we head in here, as we begin today, obviously there's a lot of ceremonial things going on today, but broadly, as you look at what needs to be addressed in New York State, where do you start this time around?
You know, it's interesting. Now my 26th year in public office, and I look back to the beginning, and the same priorities exist today. It's about, are we affordable? How are our finances? Are we safe? And not only statistically, but how do we feel about our safety in our communities? And where's the opportunity? Where are the jobs? Where are the opportunities? Not only for individuals who are working today, but their children that are growing up in our communities. Those are the three broad buckets I always try to focus on. I think the difficult challenge today, more than ever before, and I think we've made improvements and strides in the right direction, is that the headwinds coming from Washington and the White House particularly are challenging. When you look at where these cuts and impacts are happening, it's on healthcare, it's on food nutrition programs, it's on energy policy, and now, as of yesterday, we're having money withheld for childcare. Those are issues that, irregardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, that impacts every single household. And it's going to have a huge impact on our finances. We can't fill in every single void, but I know we're going to work to try to make improvements. But it's difficult, and this is the unfortunate part in this day and age. It's kind of disheartening. And once again, there are some things the president's done I actually agree with, and I've actually made it very clear, and I've shared it with those who care to listen. But this us versus them mentality in this country is not helping the overall vibe. It's not helping the spirit of cooperation, which is what government is supposed to be doing. So, today's going to be fun. It is ceremonial. The majority and minority leaders in both houses will lay out their priorities. That's good. That's great. And then, as you know, it's up to the governor to lay out her priorities, and then it's game on.
What have you agreed with the president on?
He's taken some very interesting approaches to addressing prescription drug pricing. Now it's going to take some time for it to bear out, but what he's doing best is he's shaking the cage. He's getting people to react. Now, I worry sometimes because there are a lot of people who like to blow smoke at the president, and they make him feel like he's getting his talking point, and so time will tell. But I do believe he's having an impact in regards to shaking up the market, particularly in regards to prescription benefit managers, the PBMs, the entities that have been behind the scene for the last 20, 30 years, saying they're holding down the pricing of prescription drugs, when in reality is prescription drugs continue to climb. And there's many culpable entities there, but I think he's doing a good job of shaking it up a little bit.
Let's go to, you talked about healthcare, and we've heard so much at the end of the year, about the subsidies, and some in Congress were trying to extend those from Obamacare. What's the state's role in this right now?
Well, what we have to do is actually work on what we know. And the bottom line is right now we're staring at least a good $3 million gap in that area. We are looking for permission from Washington to move some funds from the essential fund. We've got about $9 or $10 billion that has been in surplus that we couldn't touch. And we're asking them to adjust the waiver to allow us to remove and move those funds over so we can blunt the impact from Washington, D.C. And the goal would be is that, that gives us a gap we can take care of for the next 2 or 3 years. And we're hoping that Congress steps up and starts to actually focus on looking at health care for everybody, not just for a select few. But we've got to blunt the impact. And, it's interesting. Healthcare does equate to Medicaid in many aspects. And a lot of people say, well, I have commercial insurance, I don't care. And guess what? You better care. This is going to have a large impact on delivery of service, whether it's in a private practice, whether it's at an urgent care center, but particularly in our hospitals and eventually in our nursing homes.
When it comes to spending on different entities, different issues, I think obviously that's been a topic and a talking point for your colleagues on the other side of the aisle for some time. And I talked to the budget director, Blake Washington, a few weeks ago and asked him, if what's it going to look like. He said probably around the same ballpark. So you can't spend, it doesn't look like you're going to spend more right now to be able to fill these gaps.
Right.
So how do you rearrange that money? I mean, and I think that's where you start to get to those conversations of taxes and raising revenue.
It's interesting with a $239 billion budget. There is always a lot of energy and noise on maybe a couple $100 million there, here or there, and I get it. The truth of the matter is we need to operate more efficiently and smarter. For example, there's this attack on SNAP, the food nutrition programs. I do believe there's room for improvement in that area, but we need the technology and resources from DC to have a more comprehensive program. And they're not really offering that right now. Everybody knows that the food nutrition programs have been plagued for decades with challenges. When you think about the complexity of enrollment and actually what happens out in the community when people are out at the retail locations, I think we can do better. So I think, and this was actually in Blake Washington's call letter that the governor supported, where can we reduce regulation? Where can we become more efficient? And how can we streamline government? You hear a lot of the providers for the disability community. They're looking for a COLA increase of 2.7%, but what they're more just as excited about and asking for is cut the red tape. Cut these redundant activities that have been in place maybe for good reason, but is there an opportunity to go back and review that and try to change that conversation to allow providers to do their work, to deliver services, and deliver in a much more cost-effective manner? Yes, just like every household, and that's why I always talk about kitchen table issues in households. Every household has to do more with less. Well, the state has to do the same as well. And I think we can do it. I think we've done it in some areas, but to be honest with you, when there's no controversy and it's like that should happen, there's no flag waving either. There's no excitement. And that's okay. Government can be boring once in a while.
When another layer to that then becomes fraud, abuse, waste.
Yeah,
We've heard so much at the federal level, and then, like you said, that's not fraud per se, what the budget director is looking for, but just looking for ways to spend more soundly. Your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I believe on the Senate side, calling for an investigation, I guess, that looks like is New York in the same allegations that are going on in Minnesota right now. Is there any indication that there's anything, maybe not to that scale, but a waste or some fraud that's being committed that should be looked at?
I can't speak to it in my district. I'm very much in tune with childcare because that's a big, big priority. And I say that both as an individual who hears from constituents, but also as a business owner who understands the economic impact of childcare. And I can tell you, the childcare operations I know in my district, they're very legitimate. That being said, the reality is this: whenever there's a lot of money, there's always a few operators here, there, and everywhere that want to take advantage of things. I think the targeted approach of going after certain populations, I don't think it's not American. It's not justifiable. But like anything else, we need to make sure we get on board with things and really examine them. It's interesting. Last year, as you know, there was a lot of conversation about the CDPAP program, the Consumer Directed Care Program. And we're starting to see where the state is actually saving hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's gonna grow significantly. And it's interesting that the same party that's starting to call out abuse in the child care is the same group that was actually supporting these shadowy middlemen that were jacking up the cost to taxpayers. So I think we need to be toning down the rhetoric a little bit. Listen, I always say this every single day. I've said this for running a business for 40 years, and I said this running a government, and I say it while I'm here in the legislature. There's always room for improvement. But to be accusatory and going after certain populations and going after certain providers when there's no valid proof, that's not right. So let's focus on addressing the areas that we can be successful on. A CDPAP reform, as much as it has been challenging, because the state let a program get out of control for the last decade and a half. The reality is we're spending taxpayers' dollars much more wiser, whether it was fraud, more than likely waste, and definitely abuse. The governor deserves a lot of credit and I got to tell you, I got to give Carl Hastie a lot of credit. He was like a dog on a bone on this, making this go through, and I'm with him on that because I know the program. I work in healthcare. I know the goodness of the program, but I also still the waste going on.
You're also on the Ways and Means Committee. Has there been any conversations about Zohran Mamdani and how New York City is factoring into the budget to get to the end of this question would be, will upstate New Yorkers, will the rest of the state be paying for his policies?
Yeah. I don't believe the rest of upstate. I think if any of his policies are going to be paid for, it'll be paid for by New York City residents. The reality is this, and I've talked very openly about Zohran. He's been in your seat many a times in this office talking about his legislative items that were in the Government Ops Committee that I chair. He's very smart. He's extremely charismatic, obviously. And he's going to use his bully pulpit like any other individual will do. But he's got to have to work with the Capitol. He's got to work with Albany on getting his agenda through. And at the end of the day, I'm not interested in raising taxes to my constituents to support his agenda in New York City. But where we can find areas where we can work together that benefits the residents of New York City, but also the residents outside of New York City, particularly in upstate New York, I'm all in. No, listen, childcare is a good example. It is an issue. There are a lot of 3- and 4-year-olds that don't even access to childcare, let alone in many circumstances it's free in one of the communities. We know that's a $15,000 to $20,000 hit per household every single year. I've heard from constituents because the program that the governor has put initiatives in has been so impactful. It's really lowered costs for families to the point where it's oversubscribed. We can do better there. We need to find a way to get there and to do it without raising taxes on individuals. Now, it's funny, as you know, tax the rich is a very famous slogan. And it's always funny because I always say to individuals, listen, multimillionaires can definitely afford to pay more. The question is, how do you want to get there? Do you want to raise the rates? Or do you just want to tax more of their income? Because the reality is this. Our budget right now is not as bad as we expected it to be 6 months ago when H.R. 1 was passed, because Wall Street is doing very well. The individuals working on Wall Street are making beaucoup more money. Jamie Dimon made over $900 million last year. We will gladly tax him as a state resident for his income. And by the way, we're taxing at the same percentage but off a higher base. And I think that's what I always worry about when we get, listen, tax the rich is a very popular thing. Probably 7 out of every 10 people agree with that. I am more focused on the base of which we're taxing at. And if we're taxing at a fair percentage, which we're definitely at now, probably could tweak it a little bit, but we're taxing at a higher base, we're generating more revenue for the state to meet our priorities. So there's different ways to get there.
No concern about Jamie Dimon leaving the state.
We don't want to have Jamie Dimon do what Tom Golisano did years ago in Rochester. He moved down to Florida. He lives there 51% of the year. And the reality is this, do not, what's the old expression, don't kill the golden goose? Be careful, because you want them laying the same eggs, if not bigger, but you don't want them laying less eggs.
One more on this, because this is more in the weeds, but it could be an incremental way to address this, is the corporate tax rate. As you know, because of a provision in the legislature sunset, it actually lowered on January 1st, 7.25 to 6.5%. I believe there were some projections. It's going to cost $300 million, right? Something like that to the state. Would you support extending that and keeping it at least at that level now at 7.25% and bringing it back up?
What we're examining right now is the impacts of H.R. 1. There's been significant, listen, there are some good things in H.R. 1 that impact families, right? We know that in regards to seniors. We know that in regards to childcare. In regards to businesses, there is some significant impacts, primarily for big business, not for small business. I don't want to hurt small business. I really don't want to hurt big business by any stretch of the imagination. But if it's going to be a significant windfall, we need to have that conversation. Just the upfront depreciation of capital assets. Usually you would straighten it out over 7 years. Now it's going to be upfront 100%. That was only done occasionally during difficult economic times. Now it's the norm. It's good in some way. It's going to stimulate more growth, but it's going to have a significant impact on businesses. And you're seeing this. If you listen to the Wall Street analysts, 2026, they thought it was going to be challenging. It's got a rosy outcome. And the reality is, if there's a way we can use some of that to support initiatives that the business community supports, like childcare, it's worth looking at.
Finally, and I know this is a big topic, but we'll do it quickly because we don't have much more time, but criminal justice reform, and you in Albany
Yeah.
over the course of the
Yeah.
summer. You heard the local officials
Yep.
calling for raise the age changes.
Yep.
We know
Yep.
the District Attorney Association also calling for changes.
Yep.
What, if anything, should change with raise the age legislation?
I think, first of all, part of the challenge is not with the raise the age population. It's the 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. They're not even impacted by raise the age. Raise the age only impacts 16, 17-year-olds. Do I think we need to do some improvements in regards to possession of a weapon? Absolutely. I think any normal person would say a 16-year-old driving through downtown Albany with a gun, there's a problem. Either they're going to use it for some reason or they need it to protect themselves.
And that's what we've heard from the brandishing of a weapon
Right,
provision.
right.
It has to be, there
Yeah,
has to be, there's some parameters that
There needs to be improvements. And I think any reasonable person would say, we can do something here. The big challenge is, and this is the part B of this answer, is when we approved raise the age, there was the promise of resources, and the resources have been out there, but they're more of in a reimbursement process. We need to build more capacity for these. If we're going to take these children, and I call them children, and get them off the streets, get them out of the environment they're in, we need to make sure there's more opportunity and beds for them so they can get right back on the right path. We don't want them in jail cells next to hardened criminals. That has always been the principle because nothing good comes out of it. So we need to make sure that we're pushing those resources to the counties who have that responsibility up front. I talk to the counties quite regularly. Our county executives are very clear on this. We have a good juvenile detention facility here in the Capital Region, which finally, after several years, has been able to expand. But the truth of the matter is it's probably running into capacity. And if we're going to make those changes in regards to brandishing of weapons, we got to make sure we have a safe place for these children to go so they can get back on path.
It's been, we've seen last year's discovery, the 3 changes to bail reform, now raise the age, since 2019. Is this just a dismantling of what was a really landmark criminal justice reform?
No, I know. See, I look at it from a business perspective. It's called continuous improvement. It's finding ways where, listen, the intentions from day one were the best intention. The reality is not everything works perfectly. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. I think sometimes in this political environment, people aren't comfortable saying that. Obviously those who are opposed to it have no problem pointing out the problems. The problem is they don't offer any solutions. Our job as elected officials is to embrace the problems, make our best effort, recast and see, is it working, is it not, where can we make improvements? And that's what I look at it. In the business community, they do it all the time. We have called What's Six Sigma. You look at how do we make things better. However, when it comes to public safety, the margin for error is not too big.
And one quick one before we go.
Yeah.
Redistricting. Should the legislature get rid of the IRC, the Independent Redistricting Commission? Should that be put aside?
I think we need to have a very full conversation about this. Obviously, those in the minority are going to be adamantly opposed to it, unless they were in the majority, that they'd be fully supportive of it. I always have questioned, how do we ever get to independence and true independence? I think it's next to impossible. But one thing I'm very clear about, I have no problem with the public weighing in on their opinions and thoughts. And that's something that if that conversation comes up, whether it's early in session, whether it's later in the year, I look forward to having that conversation.
Do you expect a sense of urgency around that, or see how it plays out?
I don't know, but then on the other hand, I know our speaker is going to be giving his address in about 2 or 3 hours, and he may put that top of the list. I don't know. Okay. Well, we shall see. But, I think overall, the theatrics that's played out throughout the country, the California response, which actually, if you think about it, it's kind of remarkable what happened. You see the independence of the people in Indiana who stood up to the pressure from the Oval.
Yeah, the Republicans.
Yeah, but that's all kind of dying down because the truth of the matter is the redistricting is important. It's a numbers game. But what's more important is the actual policies that are coming from the White House. And quite honestly, as I said earlier, the policies in regards to health, food and nutrition programs, energy, they're not good. They don't own all the problems. We have responsibility too. But the public is the one who feels the impact. And that's really putting redistricting aside, stacking the odds aside as what's been tried, particularly in Texas. At the end of the day, people at some point are going to shed their Republican and Democratic colors and just vote for what's right. And as I track on a regular basis in my district, the last 3 to 4 years, people have, the Democratic percentage is about the same, Republicans about the same, but the independents are growing more and more. I think people are really looking at issues versus looking at what the party is.
John McDonald, thanks for your time.
You got it. Thank you.